We open on a simple, golden slice of everyday life. The sound of kernels, the promise of crunchy corn, the kind of small joy that can make a long day feel lighter. There's laughter about skipping rice because the corn is that good. It's playful, domestic, and disarmingly warm, until the doorway frames a shadow that changes the air. A voice calls a name. Huyen. Then another word lands like a gavel. Father. In an instant, life single pivots from the sweetness of shared food to the sour note of an old wound reopening. That's the genius of this episode's first turn. It shows us how fragile peace is when the past walks in unannounced. The father-in-law, Thuck's father, enters not with curiosity, but with a verdict already written. He reads the setting like a crime scene. He sees cheerfulness as betrayal. He uses time as a moral weapon. My son has only been in prison for a few months and you're already this cheerful. That single line sets the whole emotional geometry. For him, grief must be performed. Love must be frozen in place. And anything that looks like warmth is proof of infidelity to a family story he believes he is defending. The dialogue that follows hurts precisely because it's so plausible. Huyen tries to speak and can't. She apologizes without confessing to anything, because there's nothing to confess to. There are many things I can't tell you right now, she offers, which is both true and unusable. When someone has decided that seeing is believing, words become noise. The father-in-law refuses water, refuses context, refuses mercy. He has brought gifts for Maya, but not space for Huyen's truth. A lesser show would cartoon him into a villain. Life. Single does something more honest. It lets him be wounded and wrong at the same time. He loves his son. He loves his granddaughter. He also chooses a story that hurts a woman who has already been hurt. What makes these early scenes sing is the choreography of proximity. Notice how the camera, literal or imagined, keeps us close enough to feel the temperature. We're in the breath between a kind gesture and an accusation. The contrast is the point. Corn, laughter, and then a door that might as well be a courtroom. And through it all, you can feel the moral weather. A storm rolling in, barometer plunging, no umbrella in sight. Let's talk about the kind of love the show is interested in here. Not the cinematic rush of new romance, but a steadier, riskier form. The love of care. In this world, love is boiled corn and poured tea, tucked chairs and set tables, the quiet noticing of another's appetite. That's why the father-in-law's reading of cheer as betrayal hits so hard. He's mislabeling care as sin. It also reveals something quietly radical about life single. It insists that tenderness is not a lesser form of fidelity. It's a form of survival. When the father-in-law says, "The truth is right before my eyes," he's naming a common human trap. Sight masquerades as knowledge. But what he's really holding is a snapshot. No context, no backstory, just a still image that flatters his certainty. The show lets us watch the cost of that certainty accumulate in real time. You can hear it in Huyen's voice as she keeps apologizing for a crime she didn't commit. You can see it in the way the scene breathes. Apology meets a wall. Pain tries to soften anger, and anger refuses to soften. He leaves with the line that turns keys into locks. Words are useless. I'm leaving. Doors don't slam in this episode. Hearts do. What makes this segment of Life Single compelling is the emotional math it refuses to simplify. The father-in-law is not simply cruel. He's grieving and proud, trying to protect what he thinks is left of the family name. His love for Maya is real. He brings gifts and later will insist on his responsibility toward her. But his love gets weaponized by suspicion. That's the tragedy. the right feeling pointed in the wrong direction can still do damage. From a reviewer's seat, the pacing here is exquisite. The show spends time with slight gestures, the offered water, a line about not daring to come in, the repeated, "I'm sorry." Those choices keep us in the soft tissue of everyday dignity. We're watching a person try to stay respectful even as she's being misread. It's not passivity, it's restraint. There's a difference, and the show trusts us to feel it. Emotionally, this is where Life Single asks a deeper question. What does loyalty look like when justice and peace aren't on speaking terms? Huyen's answer, at least for now, is silence. Not because her truth is small, but because her fear is large. Fear that speaking will fracture a fragile family even more. And while the specifics will unfold later, the seed is planted here. Sometimes the most loving act, painfully, is to carry an undeserved bruise so someone older, someone once kind to you, doesn't have to bruise again. You can argue with that ethics. The show invites you to, but you can't deny its courage. Cinematically, I love how Life Single uses the domestic space as both haven and hazard. The same doorway that welcomes corn and laughter also ushers in judgment. The same table that feeds Maya will later carry the weight of adult conflict. This duality is not a flaw of the home, it's the truth of it. Homes are where we are most known, and, therefore, most vulnerable to being badly known. Let's focus on voice for a second. The way lines are delivered matters. The father-in-law's sentences have the cadence of a verdict. Short, flat, final. His refusal to sit, to drink, to listen is a refusal to participate in repair. Meanwhile, Huyen's words stretch and circle. "I'm sorry. Things aren't like what you think." That ellipsis is a cry. It says, "I know something I can't bear to say, and you won't bear to hear." The show doesn't force the confession. It respects the cost of disclosure. That restraint is part of its moral texture. And the child at the center, Maya, isn't a plot device. She's the silent measure of every adult choice. The father-in-law brings gifts for her even as he withdraws from conversation. His love for Maya, stated and steady, is the little light the episode protects. Keep your eye on that light. It will matter, because Life Single believes in small mercies, surviving loud mistakes. There's also a quiet, necessary observation about gendered expectations in households like this. The father-in-law's anger carries an assumption. Visible joy equals moral failure for a woman whose husband is imprisoned. The script doesn't sermonize. It simply shows the harm that comes from equating grief with virtue and equating cheer with betrayal. Human life is more complicated. People still have to cook, laugh, teach, heal. Refusing them those rights is refusing their humanity. As a reviewer, I'm struck by the humility of the craft. No big speeches, no melodramatic strings, just the ordinary gravity of misjudgment and the humble heroism of not escalating. The corn stays crunchy, the air stays tense. That's good television, a paradox you can taste. Before this part closes, consider what this section of Life Single does to your loyalties. It doesn't ask you to hate the father-in-law. It asks you to hold him accountable for not listening. It doesn't ask you to worship Huyen. It asks you to see the strength inside her softness. And it asks you to love Maya, not sentimentally, but practically. The way the characters do when they set chairs, serve rice, bring gifts, and later, insist she be visited and taught well. Love here is work you can point to. So when the father-in-law turns away with "words are useless," the show leaves us with a challenge. In your own life, are you choosing evidence that comforts your fears or evidence that tests them? Are you defending a story or discovering one? Life Single, in these opening scenes, makes a simple plea. Dignity requires listening, and listening, especially to those who are already carrying more than their share, is a love you can practice. When the story shifts back to the father-in-law's home, it's not just a change of setting. It's a change of temperature. What had been simmering tension now boils over. The man who once walked away wounded returns home full of conviction, muttering to himself, "I treated her like my own daughter, and this is what she's become." His words are sharp, but his pain is sharper. What we're witnessing isn't just anger, it's disappointment that has curdled into pride. And then comes the second collision. Husband and wife, reunited not in tenderness, but in bitterness. The mother-in-law storms in, frustrated that her husband disappeared all morning. The house, the garden, the chores. She throws everything in his face. Her words come fast, layered with years of resentment. You were gone for 2 years, and now that you have nowhere else to go, you finally come home. It's a domestic quarrel, but Life Single stages it like a moral courtroom. Each line is a verdict, each silence a wound that refuses to close. The father-in-law, still raw from what he thinks he's seen, reveals where he went, to Huyen's house. He doesn't mention understanding, only confirmation. "I saw it with my own eyes." That phrase repeats, like a drumbeat of certainty. He believes he's found the truth, but really he's found proof of his own heartbreak. The mother-in-law, hearing that, smiles with grim satisfaction. Her long-standing resentment toward Huyen has finally been validated. Yet even in his anger, the father-in-law shows a flicker of moral clarity. When she tells him not to visit Maya, he refuses. "Maya is my granddaughter. I have a responsibility to her." That single line may be quiet, but it's the moral heartbeat of the entire episode. Amid so much judgment, one form of love still holds steady. The love of a grandparent for a child. It's Life Single's way of saying, even when the adult world is poisoned by pride, something pure still survives. From a cinematic standpoint, this scene unfolds like an emotional chess match. The camera, if you imagine it, would linger on the small details. A trembling hand, a pot left boiling over, the dust in a shaft of light as two people shout past each other. But the genius is in what's not said. The father-in-law's silence after being told to let them live or die, however they want, is heavy. It's the sound of a man losing faith in his own fairness. And then, mercifully, the rhythm shifts. We return to Huyen's side, and the mood softens. The storm at one home gives way to quiet rebuilding at another. "I'm going to buy some bricks and cement," Day says. It sounds mundane, but in the language of Life Single, it's a declaration of hope. Bricks and cement mean permanence. They mean we're not running anymore. We're building something that will last. This is where Life Single shines most, turning labor into poetry. Watching Day and Huyen work side by side isn't just domestic realism, it's spiritual metaphor. After so many words that tore things apart, their actions stitch life back together. Every movement, a hand smoothing mortar, a gesture of passing a tool, becomes a small act of repair. Notice the difference in tone. Earlier, dialogue was clipped, defensive. Now, it's light and cooperative. Should we put stove openings on both sides? Let's pour soil up to here. These lines aren't filler. They're signs of partnership. The show understands something deep. When words fail, shared work speaks louder. Even Maya, their daughter, joins in the rhythm. She plays nearby, her laughter blending with the clink of metal and the scrape of shovels. When she asks to help, Dee says, "This job is dusty. Better if you help with light chores." It's gentle protection, not command. Through these small choices, Life Single teaches us about love that doesn't need grand speeches. Love, here, is in the act of care, protecting someone's hands from roughness or keeping their innocence untouched by pain. For Western audiences used to louder storytelling, this quiet may feel unfamiliar. But that's the beauty of it. The show trusts silence. It lets life breathe between lines. When Huyen checks whether Maya is asleep before returning to work, that pause says more than a dozen apologies. It's tenderness in the middle of survival. There's something profoundly symbolic about the stove they're building. The stove, in this world, is the heart of the home, the source of warmth, nourishment, and conversation. So when Day and Huyen decide to rebuild it from scratch, they're not just improving a kitchen, they're reforging their foundation, literally making space for new beginnings. The old stove, clay and fragile, broke after a few days. The new one, reinforced with cement and ash, is meant to endure heat without cracking. That's metaphor at its purest. Life has burned them before, but now they know how to build stronger. As a reviewer, I can't help but admire the visual parallel. Ashes from old fires mixed into the new foundation. It's not accidental. The show is quietly saying that healing doesn't come from erasing pain. It comes from folding it into what's next. The past isn't wasted. It becomes part of the structure that holds the future. When Huyen says she'll cook outside until the new stove dries, there's no complaint in her voice. Only patience. The sound of frying fish follows, golden and comforting. It's as if the episode itself exhales for the first time in 20 minutes. The smell of lemongrass, the crackle of oil, the soft chatter. These are not just sensory details. They're reminders that life, even after being misunderstood, can still taste good. And then, one of my favorite transitions. Maya, wake up and eat, dear. Just like that, the camera pulls back into domestic harmony. Dinner is a symphony of small kindnesses. Dee peeling shrimp for Maya, Huyen telling her to wash her hands, laughter returning like sunlight after rain. The father-in-law's shadow hasn't vanished, but for now, the home is lit from within. The show doesn't tie everything neatly. The misunderstanding still exists, echoing somewhere off-screen. But Life Single knows that not every wound heals through confrontation. Some heal through continuity, the daily repetition of gentleness, until the world remembers your truth. Let's take a moment to talk about cultural resonance. In Western narratives, redemption often comes from confession or confrontation. A big reveal, a shouted truth. But Life Single offers a different kind of courage. The courage to keep living rightly, even when wrongly accused. Huyen's choice to endure rather than retaliate isn't weakness. It's strategic compassion. She's protecting the fragile ecosystem of family, hoping that time and kindness will do what arguments cannot. As viewers, we feel both admiration and ache. We want her to be understood. But we also see why she chooses silence. That duality, strength inside restraint, is what makes her such a magnetic character. She's not the heroine who storms out demanding justice. She's the one who builds a stove, while the world misjudges her, feeding others anyway. By the time the stove stands finished, with its twin fire holes and smooth cement top, we've witnessed more than construction. We've witnessed transformation. The same hands that once trembled under accusation now create something solid, practical, and lasting. The sound of Dee smoothing the surface could be mistaken for applause. The world quietly clapping for two people who chose to build rather than break. And then comes the emotional coda. The child wakes up, rubbing her eyes, just as the last touches of the stove are done. It's such a small moment, but symbolically perfect. Innocence waking to a rebuilt world. The day that began with misunderstanding ends with warmth and light. Life single doesn't resolve everything, but it leaves us with faith that love, even when misread, still builds. If you look closely, you'll notice the symmetry. The episode begins with roasted corn, something cooked over an old fire, and ends with a brand new stove. From accusation to reconstruction, from smoke to stability, it's a complete emotional circle. The show closes not with words, but with work. That's its final statement. Healing isn't a conversation, it's a creation. So as the credits roll, you realize this isn't just a story about a woman defending her honor. It's about what it takes to keep a small corner of the world warm, even when misunderstanding chills everything else. Love, in Life Single, is cement and ash, meal and forgiveness, the steady hands that keep building even when no one's watching. And maybe that's the truest kind of love, the kind that survives without applause.